everybody. I hope you are all doing well through these uncertain times. I am Viviane Cavalcanti. I'm a member of Net Impact Amsterdam, and I'm also event programmer at Phoenix Capital Group. And on today's session, a very special session, we have a very special guest, Vincent Cornelison. He is project manager at the Netherlands Water Partnership. He is also secretary of the International Division of Top Sector and Maritime and interim program manager of Young Expert Programs. Vincent will share some insights of the current situation of the SDG 6, clean water and sanitation for all. He will also give us an overview of the Dutch water sector, the Netherlands action plans towards SDG 6, and how has COVID affected the water sanitation and hygiene sector. In addition, he will bring to the table the relevance of valuing water as an economic good and human right. Please feel free to share your questions via chat. By the end of the presentation, Vincent will try to answer to them all. If you prefer, you can keep the questions until the end and unmute yourself to ask them directly to him. So Vincent, how are you doing? Would you like to introduce a little bit more about yourself? I'm handing over to you.
Thank you very much, Andrea and Vivienne, and happy to share some insights from my perspective, of my organization's perspective on SDG 6. As you might know, this Monday or next Monday, it's World Water Day. So the right timing to discuss actually where we are now when it comes to SDG 6, and especially what still needs to be done. So I'm more than happy to provide you an overview of, let's say, the Dutch interventions, but also what globally needs to be done. And the theme of this year's World Water Day is valuing water. So I will elaborate a little bit more on valuing water as well. Thank you once again for this opportunity and at the right timing due to World Water Day. I think I can share my screen to start the presentation. And let me see if I can manage to do so. Yes, this one, share. So I think you all see my screen now. Yes, all right. As you can see, I added a picture on the first slide with not that modest, so to say, SDG 6 right in the middle. But that's how I, and hopefully you as well, or at least after this presentation and discussion, will see SDG 6 as let's say the key SDG in order to achieve them all, which we hope to do so by 2030, of course. Maybe just a brief overview of the Netherlands and water. I see we have some international guests as well, but also some guests from the Netherlands. I think it's good to have a brief overview of the history of the water in the Netherlands to see how come the Netherlands are so familiar with their water management and water interventions in that sense. On the right-hand side, you see a picture of the Room for the River program. It's one of the major programs, and you see as a subtitle, Integrated Water Management. If you talk about the Netherlands, and people know the Netherlands for, of course, the wooden shoes or the windmills, but the windmills also have to do with water. But indeed, water is one of the important key themes when you think of when talking about the Netherlands, but also the Dutch word polderen, so making, working together, collaboration, hence integrated approach, working together. The Netherlands has a history of working with water, not always as a friend, sometimes as an, let's say, enemy, but we learned, that's also the Room for the River program, that you can better cooperate with the water instead of fighting it. The Netherlands is a low-lying country. I think some of you who are now situated in the Netherlands are below sea level, and we have a long coastline, but overall, we manage the water quite well, I can say. So if you can see in the figures you mentioned here, I won't mention them all, but almost everyone has a connection to the sewer system. When you talk about leakages of the drinking water system, it's less than 5% and easily trackable. The delta works are quite familiar as well for the water management to prevent major water disasters, so to say. So I think it sums up what we as the Netherlands have achieved in our own small country, but it also comes together with a kind of a responsibility to share and to connect with other countries, maybe to learn from each other, from us, but also from other countries in a global setting. Yeah? And on one hand, we have to do it as well, because the rivers that are flowing through the Netherlands do not originate in the Netherlands. They come, for example, from Germany. So we have to cooperate in that sense. A brief history. 1,000 years ago, the Netherlands made the first man-made dike, which is an interesting fact maybe for a pub quiz later on this year. You see a lot of happenings, and I think one also to mention here, to highlight here, is the fact that we have a special envoy for water affairs. So we don't only have a ministry of water management and infrastructure, but we also have a special envoy on water affairs, which makes it clear that we as the Netherlands take water very seriously in that sense. And we have a track record of clean water, so we don't use chlorine in the water. More than 100 years ago, we connected the first toilets to the sewer system. So just a brief overview of some major, let's say, topics we achieved along the way. But I understand it's not per se what you're here for. You want to know a little bit more about the SDGs, of course, but let me start off with the history of the Netherlands and water. You've seen, hence, we have an organization, the organization I work for, actually, as Vivian also introduced, is the Netherlands Water Partnership. We are a member organization of about 200 Dutch water organizations, and it can be any organization, an NGO, a knowledge institute, government even, of course, companies, small and medium enterprises. And as we represent this broad Dutch water sector as a neutral player, we conduct a lot of programs for the government, for example. We host a lot of platforms as well. For example, I'm also co-hosting an NGO platform, which means that all the NGOs that are member of our network, that are now over 20, we bring together and discuss different topics, and also have some lobby and advocacy together. We highlight some key themes. I will elaborate a little bit more on that later on. And of course, we focus on different countries, because the Netherlands Water Partnership is an organization for Dutch water sector, but works in the international environment. And what are we talking about then? If we talk about water, so why is there an NWP in the first place? Why was the need for collaboration? Well, simply said, the pressing issues are just too big. If we talk about water, we talk about too much water, too little water, or too polluted water. So 3 major issues have to do with water. These also relate to SDG 6. I will zoom into SDG 6 a little bit later on, but these 3 topics are of vital importance for development in a broader sense. Economic development, for example, social development. Good to mention here is that over 20 years ago, there was a World Water Forum in Morocco, but there was no joint Dutch message in that sense. So there was a need for collaboration. As said in the beginning of my presentation, the Netherlands are known for their water interventions, but during this meeting in Marrakesh, it was quite fragmented. So no one voice of the Dutch water sector. So there was a need for collaboration. The NWP was started just before the 2000s, and now more than 20 years later, we're still going strong and represent over 200 water organizations. So what do we do for them? Well, matchmaking, so make sure that the organizations meet each other, but also meet other organizations. As said, we host the NGO platform, but we also host a session in which the NGOs meet with, for example, private sector companies to see if they can work together abroad. We have a worldwide network. The 200 organizations that are part of a network work internationally. They have their own network. We conduct a lot of programs, as said. I will highlight 1 or 2. Of course, events and promotion are an important part as well. Before COVID, we were participating and hosting a lot of international events. And at every event that something had to do with water, there was this Dutch pavilion or Holland pavilion we hosted. But now, of course, the events are online. And collaboration is key in this. I think everybody knows the phrase, maybe that alone you can go fast, but together you can go further. It's maybe a bit shady, or I don't know how you would mention this sentence, but I think there's a truth in it, and I will explain why. As said already, 200 organizations. This is just a snapshot of some of them. All kinds of organizations, which makes the network we host unique. And we don't have a, let's say, color in this, or we don't have a financial or political need in this. We are a neutral organization, and we do as much for Witwin and Bos as we do for Cordate, for example. A lot of organizations that are part of a network are companies. A lot of them actually also water technology companies, which are rather small companies, but key for innovation. I will explain a little bit later why that is, but to give you a brief example, everybody knows that the Earth is a blue planet. We have a lot of water, but only a really small part of the water we have is fresh water. And salt water, you all know we can't drink. You cannot really use for agriculture more and more. Water technology talks about desalination, for example, or wastewater treatment. So an important part, of course. Knowledge institutes, we have not only Wageningen University or Delft that are familiar for their technical studies, or in Dutch called land- en watermanagement studies, so water management studies. But we have also an institute which is called IHE in Delft, which is really focusing on water studies and PhDs. So knowledge institutes are key. In order to create innovation, you have to also have the knowledge in the companies as well. Government, you see 18% seems quite high. So not only our national government, but the Dutch are familiar also for the water boards, and smaller governments, for example, municipalities as well. They all have to do something, have something to do with water. And the NGOs, and a really important part to also make sure that all the interventions we do are inclusive. Yeah? So I think you all know the SDGs and the phrase "leave no one behind." The NGOs play a vital role in this as well. Too little, too much, and too polluted water. It's quite a buzzword maybe. To make it concrete, we focus on these themes. I will highlight water and conflict a little bit, water agri-food, water and finance a little bit, water technology and urban resilience, as all these themes the NWP works on relate to SDG 6 in one way or another. Where do we do that? Well, worldwide, as you can see, these are just some of the countries we work in and work with, especially because it's not a one-way ticket, but it's a collaboration. Dutch interventions, if you will, for example, in Bangladesh, won't work if it's a one-way ticket. We need to collaborate and see what local solutions would be the most suited ones, because the solution we implement in the Netherlands is not a copy-paste story for another country. But these are some of the countries we mostly work in. It has to be said that now more and more collaborations and focus even, also from the government perspective, but actually also from our members, is on Europe, because due to COVID-19, traveling is, let's say, limited. So the markets literally nearby are becoming more and more interesting, and a lot of things still has to do as well. Then a few more words on NWP, and I will zoom into SDG 6. I already mentioned some programs and alliances. As we represent the broad Dutch water sector as a neutral party, the government grants a lot of programs. The YEP program is one of the programs I also work for as an interim program manager. But maybe to mention here a few interesting ones, but for example, the Dutch search support and the Dutch risk reduction teams are programs that, bluntly said, before and after a disaster are the ones that are intervening. I think you can all think of some major disasters. And if you think and look closely, it has to do something one way or another with water. So Dutch search support tries to see if we can help as good as possible with the recovery phase. The risk reduction team helps to prevent major damage or major impact from risks. The way it's organized is that a lot of organizations are part of this list. And if something is happening, the lists will be invited to intervene, as it is always on a short notice, of course. And also an important issue here is KIFA, the Kenya Innovative Finance Facility for Water, a mouthful for an innovative program which tries to see if it can close the finance gap when it comes to water. As you all know, and I will also let it show you later on, water is a common good. It's a public good. It's even a human right. And it's, let's say, less sexy for politics. So water is not per se a economic product in that sense. Water is needed for economic products, industry, agriculture, but water itself maybe not. So investments in water are actually quite needed in order to achieve the SDGs. And let me tell you why a little bit later. First, I would like to zoom in on the Young Expert Program. Why? Not only that I'm the interim project manager, so for me it's kind of a home game, but especially because the YEP program focuses on youth involvement in the water sector, but also, as you see, the agri-food sector and the energy sector. But the idea of the Young Expert Program is to get young people, Dutch, but also local, so from the countries you just saw on the list, a lot of countries we work in, to create kind of a new generation of young experts that are all involved and committed to the SDGs. To put it this way, the water sector was, if I may say, quite gray and bold. A lot of old people, a lot of men. There was time for rejuvenation. That's not something I make up, but that's something we also heard from the organizations themselves. So the program started in 2013, and now worldwide we have over 550, I think almost with the next batch, 600 young experts, all working on SDG 6 for water, SDG 2 and SDG 7 for agri-food and energy in a global environment. And this global network and involvement of youth is key in order to achieve SDG 6. Here you can see already you have water focusing on SDG 6, but it goes without saying that SDG 17 is one of the major, let's say, the most important SDGs we have, because as said, and I will keep saying it, and probably not the last time this meeting, alone you can go fast, but together you can go further. And that's what we need in a sustainable way. Okay, so much about the Netherlands and water, a brief history about the Netherlands Water Partnership. And the image you saw at the beginning, I've put water in the center. And let me explain to you why water needs to be in the center. You see this image again. Simply said, in order to achieve the 17 SDGs, you need to achieve SDG 6. Otherwise, you can't achieve the other ones as well. I think you all know, for example, in order to create food, we need agriculture. Agriculture needs water. In order to create, for example, improvements in the field of, in the broad field of healthcare, let's say, improvements in health goes hand in hand with access to safe water, to clean water, and for example, washing your hands. The one thing we learned during the COVID-19 pandemic everywhere is wash your hands. What do you need for washing your hands? Of course, water is a vital in that. But first, the SDGs. In 2015, basically the whole world agreed upon 17 goals. The difference with the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals we had, that ended in 2015, is that the MDGs stated, for example, half of the population or most of the population. It was like not everyone, but at least a lot. The SDGs state actually everyone. The leave no one behind phrase, I think it's familiar, but it says no cherry picking, not no this, yes, and maybe the harder reachable part of the population, for example, no, everyone needs to be part of this agenda. It focuses on a lot of things, basically everything, if you will, social, economic, cultural, environmental challenges. So it focuses on a lot of things. And as stated in this bullet as well, and I added some links in the slides as well, so you can look at the information yourself, is that it's interlinked. It's important to mention that all the SDGs are interlinked. If you don't achieve one, does have an effect on the other one. And WASH, as said, hygiene, sanitation, water, drinking water, is one of the first lines in defense if you talk about sustainable recovery. It goes without saying, I think, and I mentioned it just before as well, during this COVID-19 pandemic, water is vital to prevent the spread of COVID-19. On the left-hand side, you see already one concern, if I may put it that way. And I have another overview which states it in more detail, but still staggering number of people lack safe or safely managed, if you will, drinking water. And a lot of people, almost 800 million, without basic drinking water. I mean, for us, everyone here in the Netherlands or Europe, you can just open the tap and you have free drinking water, or at least it feels free. It comes cheap, and you can drink it as much as you would like, but it's not for everyone a given. Okay, so SDG 6, what are we talking about? SDG 6 is the water SDG, clean water and sanitation for all. It has a lot of targets as well. You see, I won't mention them all, but you see that access to safe and affordable drinking water is one. The affordable part is interesting. It relates to the Value Water Initiative, or Valuing Water, which is the theme of this year's World Water Day. But you see also water related to pollution. As already said, too polluted water is one of the major issues, and also cross-country, because, for example, in the Netherlands, a fictive case, but if you look at the Netherlands, the rivers in the Netherlands, they flow via Germany into the Netherlands. If Germany pollutes the river, the Netherlands has to deal with the consequences. So you already see the interconnectedness with different countries, but also with different sectors. For example, water usage. If you use a lot of water for agriculture, the water you use for agriculture, you cannot use for drinking water, for example, or for industry. So it's all interrelated. And we also not only look at the quality of water in that sense, and drinking water and hygiene, but also at the water management. The Netherlands is not the only low-lying country. You have other countries. Bangladesh, for example, is a low-lying country. But also other delta countries face the consequences of the power of water, if I put it that way. Sea level rising, droughts, you all have heard about these pressing issues. But still, 5 years to go. 5 years have passed, 10 years to go. Where do we stand? I really like the bullets on the left-hand side, not only because I made them, but also because it's true in that sense that if we look at water, as said, it's a common good. It's a given almost, so it's not sexy. It's not, politics cannot per se score with it in that sense. But if you look at the financial part, it becomes interesting. If you see, for example, every $1 you invest in safe drinking water, it yields more than $3 in safe medical costs. And that relates almost directly to the picture on the right-hand side. You see in the right top corner, I hope you can all see it clearly, but I'm shocked by this amount, but 2 in 5 healthcare facilities don't have access to water. So, which you can imagine what that has to do with hygiene and health. So if you can make investments in that, you can create a lot of prevention as well. It all has to do with it always interlinked with each other. Another interesting part to mention, sad interesting part, if I phrase it like that, is in the right bottom corner, because water scarcity is one of the major challenges for the coming time, and it goes hand in hand with conflict and crisis and migration. And the estimates are, as you can see, if things continue the way they do, 700 million people might be displaced or are migrating due to water scarcity all over the world, which is an amazing, from my perspective, a high number. But it has directly to do with water in that sense. Again, 5 years have passed, 10 years to go. We made some progress, but still, and you can see the images for yourself, 2.2 billion people still lack safely managed drinking water. 4.2 billion people safely manage sanitation. And both are directly linked again to, for example, the health SDG. That being said, I would like to talk about why water needs to be in the center. I think most of you know that water and climate change are directly linked. So a lot of disasters that are happened have to do with water, not only floodings or tsunamis, if you will, but also droughts, sea level rise. A lot of disasters have to do with water. And also to make it concrete, you can try, if you can see, you can try to make it see if you can link it to a number or amount of costs that these, let's say, climate disasters cost you as a country or cost you as a world. And it's 1.7 billion damage in 17 years. I mean, that amount, it's 100 billion per year, is so high that you can't imagine how much money that is in that sense. And we are able to manage this in the sense that we cannot manage these staggering number of costs, but we can manage to prevent these costs to have to be made in that sense. And let me tell you why in a bit. But I think also an important part here is that without water, there's no energy and no food. Yeah? The food part goes without saying. I mean, in order to grow food, we need water. In order to grow grass, maybe for cows, if you look at that part, I think a lot of things could be changed in that. But anyway, we need water for our livestock, but also water, of course, for our to grow our vegetables, for example. I think most of you also know, and I mentioned it before as well, sea level rising is a major issue also for urban areas. So just to put it this way, water is linked to economics, there's financial challenges, geopolitics, migration, conflict, environment, climate change. All issues are interrelated here. Then again, water needs to be at the center. You need to focus on water. And this is just another image which shows all the SDGs and the interlinkage with water. And on the right-hand side, I think this sums it up quite well. SDG 2, zero hunger. We need food to enable to create zero hunger in that sense. But 70% of all water, mind you, fresh water is used for agriculture, 70%, which means that 30% is available, if you will, for other purposes. So water is needed for that. And you cannot always use salt water. Changes are coming, innovations are there, but you cannot always use salt water for your agriculture, and especially not for drinking, for example. Well, health and well-being goes without saying, but also gender equality, for example. You can see the numbers, but in a lot of countries, the women and girls are responsible for the water collection. If there's no water nearby, it takes a lot of time to collect water. But this time cannot be spent on school, for example. Yeah, so it has also to do with gender equality, but also safe areas for children to go to school. If there are good, let's say, toilet facilities, young girls can still go to school and don't have to be at home in time of menstruation, for example. Those are really pressing issues when you talk about gender equality. Well, industry uses a lot of water, we all know that, but also industry pollutes water. So not only the water usage is of importance when you look at industry, but also wastewater treatment. Well, climate I already mentioned, and life on land. Well, I mean, humans buy 1 million plastic bottles a minute. It's, I mean, you can imagine what that has to do with life on land in that sense. Well, the third slide on why water needs to be at the center. Well, if you look at all the previous slides and the thing I said, water is life. I mean, just put it that way, water is life. Without water, you can't live. And water empowers people and institutions. As said, if you have a water tap in your house or nearby in your village, it takes less time to collect water. It's clean water. The chances you getting ill from the water is less, of course. So it has to do with empowering people and institutions. We think that, and no, not only we think, but we know that collaboration in this is key. Not only from my NWP perspective, but in general, I think collaboration is key. The NGOs, for example, might have a good local network in a certain country. A drinking water company might have a good solution for drinking water systems. Maybe a water technology company has a good system for water filtration. Put them together, and you create an integrated solution for a certain area. So collaboration is key in this. To make it concrete, COVID-19, but I already said it before, COVID-19 has, of course, to do with, well, water and sanitation, put it that way, has to do with COVID-19. In every commercial and all the things we learned, we don't shake hands anymore, and we do have to wash our hands as much as possible. And we wash our hands here most of the times with water and soap. So water in that is an important part. And talking about innovation related maybe to plastic waste, if you will. I won't show it now, but it's one of the links in this presentation as well. By making use of water bottles, plastic bottles, or Coke bottles, or whatever bottles, you can easily make kind of a water system people can use to wash their hands. I will make sure that the video will be available afterwards. But talking about innovations, plastic waste is a major challenge, but you can also make use of it for the better. In this case, in COVID-19 situations. Okay, we talked about SDG 6. Talked about why it should be in the middle, why it should be key, SDG 6. But then, what do we do as the Netherlands then? It's not my field of expertise per se. But let's talk about finance then. I mean, what needs to be done is that we need more finance in order to achieve SDG 6, but it's an investment. As you saw in previous slides, $1 can yield $2, $3, $4. We need to create, let's say, insight and share information about financial instruments. What I mean with that is that sometimes financial institutions are invited, let's say, a little bit too late at the table. So the investment opportunity has gone, or people are not aware, or so it's important to create this link. That's something we also do as NWP. And also an important one is that it states here as well that support consortium building and matchmaking. The example I just gave, for example, drinking water company, a water technology company, and an NGO, this collaboration is key, but also sometimes you need the right funds to do so. So the consortium building is we as NWP, but as the Netherlands as a whole, try to facilitate. The Kenya Innovative Financing Facility for Water, KIFA, I already mentioned as an interesting project. I really invite you to look at the website for more information on that project, because it makes it concrete how we try to close this financial gap, if you will. And simply said, and I will zoom into that, is that it's needed to increase more visibility when you talk about water and finance for water as a theme as well, not only in the Netherlands, but in the international setting as well. This image, just two examples of what we do as the Netherlands. And what I mean with what we do as the Netherlands is what, for example, in this case, the NGOs do and some drinking water companies. It's stated in Dutch. And in the Netherlands, it has also the phrase iedereen de pot op, which basically means in English that, well, I won't translate it literally, but we state that the Netherlands has set a goal, their own goal, the Dutch government set a goal that we as the Netherlands want to contribute to the fact that 50 million people should have access to safe sanitation and to toilets in 2030, and 30 million people to safe drinking water. That's the goal that the Netherlands set for themselves. Even though we have to reach still billions of people, the Netherlands focuses on this amount of people. The NGOs you see here in this image, they talked with members of parliament to create extra attention for this goal and make sure to hold the Dutch government accountable that everything is set in place to achieve this goal. And so you see the government sets a goal, the NGOs keep the government accountable in this. And on the right-hand side, you see the NIWA, the Netherlands International Water Ambition, which is an ambition stated by 4 ministries. You see them there. And at the bottom, you see the 3 major, let's say, pillars or focus points. Again, local capacity through partnerships. Collaboration is key. I keep saying it. But also adopting an integrated approach. So not a one-way ticket. And water safety and water security, because water crisis have to do with, if you talk about safety and security, not only with water and conflict, but also safety and security in the sense that if there's drought or too much water or sea level rising, it has also to do with being secure in the area you live and work. And of course, promoting the Netherlands as a center for excellence. I told you right in the beginning, the history of the Netherlands and water. It's something we as the Netherlands want to keep this way, but we have to bring to the table what it takes to do so. Just some brief examples what we as the Netherlands as a whole do. So where do we stand then? I don't know if the image is quite small, but let me tell you this. The highlights are mentioned on the right. 2.9 million people gained access to an improved water source since the start of the SDGs and the Netherlands intervention. 2.9 million people. The goal is 30 million. So we're not there yet. The numbers here mentioned here are stated, I believe, between 2018 or 19, so still a long way to go. But as you can see also on the left-hand side, this green image, maybe it's quite small, but it stated we are on track. So presumably the government states that, well, with the current investments we make and with the outlook how it goes, more and more people will gain access. So we're on track to achieve the 30 million people. 5.3 million people have gained access to improved sanitation. A lot of people still to reach to achieve the 50 million. But again, also here on the left-hand side, green image that we are on track with this. So a lot of things have been done. A lot of things still need to be done. Before I go to the valuing water part of this session, briefly, although it's in Dutch, I think it's one of the most important ones to mention, water crisis. I know it's in Dutch, but it states basically too much, too little, too polluted water creates a crisis. And it's not only, let's say, a given by nature. It's sometimes, and most of the times, is man-made disasters. And that's also the responsibility we have as mankind to prevent these crises. So again, water needs to be at the center. For the final part, and also looking at the time, the final part, I'm talking about valuing water. Next Monday, World Water Day. World Water Day's theme is valuing water. And on LinkedIn, I saw Net Impact also shared some interesting videos and documents. And I think the Netflix documentary explaining the water crisis is quite interesting. It explains the water crisis in a interesting and understandable way. And I think the most important part here to mention, and you see it also on the left-hand side, is that the amount of water is fixed. And so the state might differ. It can be solid, liquid, or gas, but the amount of water is fixed. If you look at the division, you see 97% is salt water, which we cannot always use. Fresh water is there, but 2% is frozen, so only maybe 1% of all the water is fresh and can be used. Of that, 70% goes to agriculture, 22% to industry, 8% for personal usage. So if you look at these images, it's Friday, so maybe it's time for beer and burgers, but for one beer, it's also shown in the documentary, we need almost 74, 75 liters of water. You can think of the reasons why. I mean, you need to grow hops for your beer. You need to make sure your machines are cleaned. You need to make sure that so you need to make sure that a lot of steps need to be taken in order to create one glass of beer. The thing you can do is, of course, drink less beer, for example. But if that's not an opportunity, you can also look at the fact that breweries are now looking at how to cope with wastewater treatment. And some water is wastewater after the process of brewing. How can you reuse this water for your next step? If you look at meat as well, you need a lot of liters of water in order to create a hamburger in that sense. And that's the interesting thing about the valuing of water. Because the water is cheap, the meat might be cheap, a beer might be cheap. If you think about the amount of liters of water you use just for one beer, and still the price of this beer is quite low, it seems a little bit odd. This slide shows a lot of information, I'm aware of that, but it shows the number of dollars we need to achieve SDG 6. So we need $7,500 billion in order to achieve SDG 6. So how do we do that? How do we make sure that everybody has access to safe drinking water, sanitation, still have a beer now and then maybe? How do we do that? On the right-hand side, you see one of the initiatives also from the Dutch government. It's called Water is Leverage, in which we state that water should be key in economical development. Water is the key in order to create environmental sustainability. And let me tell you how we do that. First of all, water is a human right. So it goes without saying that everybody has to have access to safe drinking water. So all the governments need to be aware of this and try to do their best to create safe access to safe drinking water for all. It's a human right. It's not even, it's in this case, it's not an economic theme, which also means that if you value water, how do you do that? You use it for your beers and burgers, but also it's a human right. How do you balance this? Well, our Prime Minister, and presumably our Prime Minister for the next 4 years, Rutte, was part of the launch of the Valuing Water Initiative of the Netherlands. And the Valuing Water Initiative more or less has the idea or demonstrates what the Netherlands and the world and the United Nations, if you will, can do in order to add value to water. And I won't explain all these steps that we're taking to do so, but I think this shows it all. And especially the 5 principles, if you will, to value water. I think one of them is maybe every principle is as valuable as the other one, but I think the recognizing that water has multiple values is important because it's a human right, but we also need it to grow crops in order to have food, and we don't want anyone to be hungry. So human right to drinking water should go hand in hand with agricultural usage of water, but we also know that industry needs water. And the image of Heineken on the right-hand side, still Friday, so I put Heineken in it as well. It's one of the breweries they have. I think this example goes for Mexico, that they have a wastewater circulation system that brewing 1 glass of beer does not use 74 liters of water, but way less than that. But it also has to do with build trust, and build trust has to do with cooperation. I mean, we need to trust each other to cooperate. If an NGO does not want to work together with a drinking water company, the drinking water company might not reach the ones they want to reach, and vice versa. So building trust is important. Also between countries, Germany, the rivers start there that flow into the Netherlands, building trust. Protect the sources as well. Yeah? It has to do with pollution, wastewater treatment. If you use all your groundwater, no water would be left for pumping up the groundwater for drinking water. Educate to empower, and invest and innovate. And now I have come to my final slides, that even though it sometimes sounds as a challenge and $7,500 billion, how do we do that? Well, there's also a dot on the horizon. There's also a hope in that sense. We're not there yet. We have 10 years to go. And in the Dutch phrase, hoop doet leven, or hope springs eternal, or hope is life, you can translate it into water is life. I think everybody knows about droughts a few years ago in Cape Town. Day 0 was coming, which meant that there would be no fresh water anymore. Although Cape Town is located in the southern tip of South Africa, surrounded by oceans, still there was a water shortage. The link I shared here is an interesting video of National Geographic. It states that the closer day zero came, the more and more people changed their behavior. And so if the issue is that pressing, people can change. And day zero get postponed and postponed and postponed and never came. And so changing behavior is an important one. Putting water on the top of the political agenda. On the pictures, you see two former members of parliament of the Netherlands. They were the foster parents or adoptive parents, if you will, for SDG 6. They had a close connection with the NGOs of our network, and they were our spokespersons in the parliament to hold the Dutch government accountable in order to achieve the SDGs, or at least our part. So there's hope in that as well. It become more and more of a political issue. You know, it's a human right, but if you know it's related to economics, to agriculture, to the industry, to migration, water becomes more and more an important issue. We do have a track record, a history in the Netherlands with water, and we want to continue with that. We have an ambition, the Netherlands International Water Ambition. So we want to do that as well. The YEP program is an important one because the next generation, you have to deal with the consequences if we do or do not make it in achieving the SDGs. So involvement of youth is important. Innovation as well. We have a lot of salt water, for example, or polluted water, but if we can make that and turn into fresh water, we can achieve a little bit more in that sense as well. And for example, just the example of my organization, 200 organizations involved in the water sector. One way or another, they all have to do with SDG 6 and want to contribute in their way. So this collaboration is key as well. So there's a dot on the horizon. There's a lot of things still to do, but I think we are on our way to hopefully a better future and brighter future in that sense. So thank you for listening to my story about SDG 6. I presume there will be a lot of questions or things I can explain a little bit more detail. So Vivian, maybe I can give you the word and I can stop share my screen. Yeah.
Thank you, Vincent. Very insightful presentation. Thank you very much. I think now we can open a little bit for the audience to ask questions. We already have some here. First of all, you said that you have a partnership with more than 200 organizations. Are there any insurance companies looking for any WP for insights of or partnerships to grow their expertise on these water risks?
Yeah, so insurance companies, you mean? Sorry?
Yeah.
What you see now, and I think it's called Swiss Re and some other organizations, you see some organizations that are now more and more involved in the insurance related to climate disasters and also water related climate disasters. So kind of insurance in that sense. I'm more than happy to link you to my colleague who is more involved in the water and finance part, because it's an interesting question. I think it's a really interesting question because if you look at insurance in the water sector, it always has to do with export or it has to do with economic growth. But if you make the impact of water-related disaster, if you calculate how much it costs, it's not more than logic to get insurance companies also involved. But more than happy to follow up after this call to link you to the right person. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Also, we have one question about cloud seeding, which modifies the weather conditions. Is there any project or research going on and that studies how can affect the local regional water resources?
Yeah, so thank you for the question. I'm personally not familiar with the cloud seeding part, but if I understand it correctly, it's that you can modify weather and therefore control more or less what happens with your surroundings and your land, etc. I know that certain organizations that are part of a network work on these topics, and not per se, let's say changing the weather, but also make sure that you, in especially humid areas, you can condensate water, for example, things like that. But it's an interesting question, and I think more and more innovation, these water technology companies are working on this topic, and they have to do that as well. But then again, I'm not familiar with this topic other than what I know and heard. But I can dive into our member base because I think some of the organizations in the network definitely work with that. Yeah, it's a good question, Gurkan. Yeah.
Another question is if you expect countries or regions to implement water taxes similar to carbon cap and trade schemes.
Yeah, that's a good question, and at the same time a really difficult question, because the valuing water initiative and also the 5 principles I mentioned shows that it's a difficult discussion. On the one hand, water is a human right, so everybody needs to have access to water. So if you put a price on water or people need to pay for water, maybe not everyone would have access to water. On the other hand, if you should, for example, ask a certain amount of tax or payment of, for example, industries or agriculture for water, that might be the case. In the Netherlands, we do pay a price for water, but it's so low. So I think that's an ongoing discussion, because what does happen abroad, for example, and that system does work quite well in certain countries where they don't have tap water in their house, but certain tap water areas in, for example, the village, they pay with prepaid cards. So they only pay for the water they actually use. So so people are aware of the amount of water they use and they need, and they pay for it. It's not a high amount, but as long as you make a transaction, there's a activity you do, and you are aware of the fact that the amount of water you need. So those developments you see, prepaid water, we pay it monthly in the Netherlands to our drinking water company, but those things will happen. The water taxing itself would be I think that would be a difficult discussion. I think it would be more like in the prepaid water, and what you also do see, I think it's good to mention here, is that the Dutch drinking water companies have an international program which is called Waterworks, and they work together with the so-called water operating partnerships. They work together with drinking water companies abroad to see how not only, let's say, the technical part of drinking water works, so for example, the piping or the tap water areas, but also the governance of water. So I think that's also an interesting part to mention, how the Dutch drinking water companies govern their water systems and what other countries can learn from that. Yeah.
Do you see this kind of scaling up and being kind of a global model for other countries? Do you see that if this can happen? Kind of?
Yeah, and that's not only for drinking water, which is the Waterworks program, but it's also with the Dutch water boards. It's called the Blue Deal. It's also an international program that all the Dutch water boards have. Also, most of the Dutch water boards have an international assignment, which also is focusing, for example, on governance, how to sustainably manage different water resources as well. So you see it in different areas, and the government co-finances these programs, but the drinking water and the water boards are the ones that are actually doing the job in the field with as a collaboration with the local water authorities.
Okay, thank you. We have the student group Living Lab Dutch Delta Visual that they want to ask you a few questions.
Yep.
Feel free to ask.
All right, Vincent, thank you very much for your clear presentation. We really liked it as a group, and we think there's a lot of points of reference with what we're doing. So I have a few questions. Actually, I wrote them all down, but I'll start with one question. So how do you see with the current environment of working online, how do you see the contribution to solving water-related issues in countries abroad? Sorry.
Yeah. Maybe I can answer that right away. That's an interesting question, because the COVID-19 pandemic and working online and working at home. Let me phrase it this way: 2 major challenges we see. COVID-19 has a direct link with health. For example, working at home means not able to travel, maybe not making interventions yourself in country, but the bright side is, of course, that the world is quite interconnected. It's also the downside, because COVID spread as fast as it did. But anyway, the interconnectedness is there. So not being able to go to the field does not mean you don't have people in the field in that sense. But if you look at a major issue and a challenge is that, for example, due to COVID, certain countries, also Netherlands, but certain countries announce lockdowns, people should stay inside. And that has to do also with oppression in the sense that certain challenging or maybe even bad interventions in certain countries could continue because people were not able to go on the street and demonstrate or oppose. And so there's also a downside as well, if you look at that. And it has to do with major projects, water projects as well. So maybe that answers a little bit your question. It still can be done, but of course, after COVID, it would be better. The positive side is that due to COVID, water is more and more in the picture in that sense, because everybody knows to wash their hands and what you need water for washing your hands.
And my question was, sorry for interrupting you. My question was
also that Vivienne, I think you have not too much time anymore, but I'm happy to answer more questions.
2 more minutes. I don't want to take all of your day. So yeah, we also have one question from Bianca, and she's curious about if you have other countries collaborating that are more front runners on SDG 6.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. And Strainia, I'm not sure if I pronounce your name correctly. I'm more than happy to discuss afterwards the questions in more detail with you. Bianca, yes, we work with other countries. That's needed. And I think the front runners, okay, the Netherlands, we would see ourselves as front runners in the case of water, but basically within our borders. If we talk about collaboration with other countries, you talk, for example, with countries like Mozambique. There's a close cooperation with Beira, the city of Beira, with the Dutch government, for example. Dutch interventions are not copy-paste, but are implemented together with the Dutch government with the government in Beira in Mozambique. What I mean with this example is that every country has their own focus on water and their own ideas and their own local context in which it's placed. So even though the Netherlands would be a front runner, we do need the information and intervention and knowledge of the countries we work in and with. You see in Europe, for example, water management is managed quite well in the sense that in a lot of countries you can drink tap water, but it's not per se the only element of success when you talk about water. It's also about water management, floodings, etc. So yeah, it really differs per country. I won't have a list there here for you, which you will say, well, at least these 10 countries are doing great as well. But it underlines the importance of collaboration with other countries. If we want to do a project in Bangladesh, we don't build concrete dikes. We build together with the Bangladeshi dikes that are fitting in the local context in that sense. So the knowledge we have is linked or connected or mixed or mingled, if you will, with the knowledge in the countries themselves. Yeah.
Thank you, Vincent. It was a very, very nice, interesting, informative presentation and very also insightful questions. Thank you for our audience. If you have any more questions, you can connect with Vincent. His email is in the presentation, so you will have access to a recording of this, and then you can send him an email with the questions. Thank you all for dialing in. I wish you all have a nice weekend and enjoy the weather that is sunny, at least here in Amsterdam. If you are interested in being part of Net Impact Amsterdam community, please apply to become a member on our website, www.netimpactamsterdam.nl. Well, thank you all for coming and have a great rest of Friday.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Everyone.